Dun, 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 dun. This thing is literally bigger than my face. Hello again, team. Welcome back for another video. Today we are setting up my new bullet journal in this Ginormator B5 doc grid, 160 pages, yada yada yada. Look at it. Look at the cute little fox. But seriously, it's huge, and I am not sure how this is going to go down, but I am excited all the same. As you can see, the majority of my past journals, and by majority I mean all of my past journals, have been the A5 size. So jumping into a B5 has me a little bit nervous, but it's good to try new things and it's good to get outside of our comfort zone, supposedly. Very excited to be setting up our new bullet journal, also known as New Joe. When it's not so new, we'll call it a Blue Joe, because it's blue. Get it? Anywho, that feels like enough for me. Let's get to setting it up. Jumping in with the nameplate page, the first thing I'm doing is attaching a small flip out to the bottom corner of just inside the cover. This one is a list of my weekly reset items, just so I have it there as an easy to access reference, so I can flip it out regardless of where I am in my journal to see what those tasks are. This little piece of paper is what we call a tip-in, and I do have a separate video on how to make these and use them in your journal, which is linked in the description box below. Flipping over and onto the first doc grid page though, as I typically like to do in my new journal setups, on this one we're putting in a quote page. For all of the pages in this start of journal setup, I'm using a simple monoline border, and I thought that considering I've got a bigger journal this time around, I could probably get away with using a thicker pen. So for all of the black outlining and writing in this setup, I've used the Papermate Flare pen. This is one I haven't used in a while, but I actually really enjoy using them. I should probably use them more often than I do. I really enjoyed the boldness and the quality of the black ink. The quote that I opted to start my new journal off with though is, "Life does not get better by chance, it gets better by change." I feel like this is a message that I very much need at the moment, and so I appreciate having it at the front of my journal. To decorate the pages of this setup, I decided to use some blackout paper, so just making use of my doc grid notepad from Archer & Olive. I stuck those pieces into the corners with some double-sided tape, trimmed away the excess, and then rounded the corners using my Creative Memories corner rounder. On to our next spread though. On this one I'm going to be setting up some pages that I don't actually typically use in my journal, but that is a grid spacing guide on the left and a key on the right. If you're new to the grid spacing guide, the page I'm setting up here is probably looking a little bit strange, but effectively how this page gets used is as a reference for how you could divide your page up into different segments. The pink cross in the middle of the page shows me how to divide my page into halves, both vertically and horizontally. The orange vertical lines show me how to divide the page into 4 equally sized columns. The little green lines we have up the side show me how I could divide the page into 7 rows, leaving some space at the top for a header bar. That one's particularly helpful for weekly setups. And then the sections we have in yellow show me how to divide the page into thirds, both vertically and horizontally again. In terms of the numbers that I've written out, this shows me how many boxes I have across the page and down the page. Because this is my first B5, I thought that having a grid spacing guide might be helpful, just while I'm getting used to the spacing that I've got. As I've been using an A5 for all of my previous journals, the spacing in that one I was quite familiar with, but for the B5, not so much. The grid spacing guide is another bullet journal idea that I have a separate video on, so that one can be found linked in the description box below, along with any other related videos. Here though we're setting up the key for my journal. I don't typically put a key in either, just because I'm pretty familiar with the symbols that I'm using nowadays, but I do want to get a little bit more consistent in how I'm using those, in particular for my events and for my notes. Both of these pages are ones that I'm going to be keeping an eye on, just to make sure that I actually use them. If I find that during the course of this journal I don't use those pages, they're probably not going to feature in my next one. Flipping over though, and we're on to the future log. This is a bullet journal collection that I've had an interesting relationship with previously. In some of my journals I've opted to leave it out, just because I find that my use of the future log isn't super consistent. On this one in particular though, I'm hoping to record novel holidays, along with any other future events that I have coming up. But I've been really enjoying celebrating things like National Grilled Cheese Day or Tim Tam Day, in particular the national days that are related to food. They've just been a little bit of fun, and I thought it would be nice to have a place to summarize them in my journal, and the future log seemed like a reasonable place to do this, especially because it doesn't get a lot of use for other things. As you can see, the general structure on this one is that we have 3 columns per page, which I'm going to separate into 2 halves, the top half and the bottom half, using a dividing piece of paper. But before we do that, we've written out all of the monthly headers, with some mistakes being made, but nothing a little bit of extra dot grid paper couldn't fix. And then I'm using a light grey Tombow to highlight every second row. This is something I've been really enjoying using in my journal recently, so I wanted to make sure that I utilised it in this setup as well. Pen work done, time for the paper. The black pieces of paper I'm ripping out here again come from my Archer and Olive notepad. I've had this B5 notepad for ages and hadn't actually gotten around to using it. Typically I use my Neapolitan notepad, which is the A5 size because I've been using an A5 journal, but I did certainly need the extra length for some of the pieces of paper I was putting into this setup. I decided not to put a title on this page because I know it's the future log, I don't really need a title to tell me that. Plus, I also didn't want to write on top of the blackout paper, because I felt like if I did that here, I'd have to do it on the other pages, and me and gel pens don't really get along. I couldn't be bothered using my acrylographs. I'm gonna just put it down as a style choice. But I do very much love the contrast we have going between the larger sections of just black and the rest of the spread. The spread we have here though is where we're getting into my goals. So on the left we have a level 10 life check-in, where I get to rate different areas of my life out of 10, so 10 being the best, 0 being the worst. Not that I've ever given anything a score of 0, that would be pretty dire. Anywho, and the page on the right is going to be for my goal action plan, or kind of like a goal roadmap for the next 3 or 4 months. I haven't quite decided on the layout that I want to use for that one, so I don't set it up in this video. If you guys do want a separate video on how I set that one up, just let me know, I'll see what I can do. But I also figured that because I still have about half a month until I'm actually going to be using this journal, I really want to wait till I'm a little bit closer to actually starting to use this journal properly before I set up that goal page. For my level 10 life though, the different categories of life I have for this one are physical health, mental health, personal development, home environment, finances, career, partner, social, and family. I have a little grid next to each of those labels where I can colour in the boxes to represent what my score is out of 10 for those areas. And then down the bottom I have a space to put in a mini goal for each of them, a mini goal that I could work on to help me improve my score in that area. At this stage I'm not too sure what I want to colour the boxes in with. Not sure if I'm going to use my rainbow Tombows or if I'll just use the light grey. But I do very much like the combination of the black and the rainbow and the white. The whole contrast thing is very much my happy place. The next page in our setup though is a replacement for my weekly meal planner. This one instead is a meal planning cheat sheet, or effectively a list of all of my favourite meals, so when it comes time to doing our meal planning for the week, we actually know the food we like. I know that sounds really stupid, but I swear every single week we go to do the meal planning, we sit there for an unnecessary amount of time just being like, what do we even eat? Hopefully this page will remedy that, so I have a bunch of different sections related to different types of meals. So we've got lunch, pasta, chicken, lazy, and other. Those categories might sound a little bit interesting to you, but I find that I don't really put a lot of meals on my favorites list that don't fall into those categories. And, well, lunch is just a particular pain point for me. I'm never really good on what I want to have for lunch, so I thought that having a section for lunch where I can write down my favorites for lunch would actually be helpful. I don't populate that list in this video, but I am looking forward to writing down my favorites to have as a reference. On the other side of the spread, we have a place to write down my monthly challenge ideas. So for example, monthly challenges that I've been doing this year included my daily exercise challenge, my getting up and going to bed at the same time every day challenge, and the current one that I'm doing is self-compassion journaling, or journaling my thoughts and feelings on a daily basis, just as a form of self-care. So when I set up my friend Rachel's journal at the start of this year, one of the spreads that I included was related to our book club. So having the rules of our book club, and then a space to record what each of our book club books were for each month of the year. Every time I've seen her journal since then, I've been jealous that I didn't have that kind of a page, so I had to make sure I included it in this setup. On the spread for the J&R book club, we have on the left a place for the rules of the book club, a place to write out each of our 12 genres, so one for each month, a smaller space for book ideas, and then on the right I have a place to record each of the book club books we have for the first 8 months of the year. Under each of those spaces I have a little star rating, so 5 little stars to rate the books, and eventually what I'll be doing is printing off little pictures of the covers of the books that I can stick in to commemorate the books that we read. Although I have been super tempted to start myself a reading journal, I am aware that I really don't read enough to justify one, so this spread is my stand-in in the meantime. Maybe one day when I read more, I'll start myself a reading journal. Flipping over though, and the next spread we have serves two purposes. So this is a combination of a media consumed page and a to checkout page. I found I didn't get a lot of use out of my things to check out page in my current journal, so I'm thinking that if I combine it with this other use of being a media consumed page, I might be a little bit more likely to check in with it. This is another spread where I had that black paper run across the middle to separate the top and the bottom of the page. So I have spaces for movies, TV shows, books and songs, which I put together, and other stuff. So that could be stuff like podcasts, articles, whatever else. Our next spread is another simple one, and this is my someday maybe list. So a place to put down tasks that I do want to do, but I don't need to do them right now. Rather than putting these tasks on my weeklies as notes, I like to have them all in the one place that I can refer back to. As I said, the setup of this page is super simple. It's just the title and then a bunch of those grey lines. Along with the someday maybe page, another staple that I like to have in my new bullet journal setups is a place to plan out my next bullet journal, so the one that I'll use after this one. I've decided to be a little bit more structured to my approach in this. Typically I just leave a blank page where I can write notes down, but for this one, on the left hand side, we have a couple of different sections that I can write in. So a place to outline what I did and didn't like about this planner, places to list what I'm going to keep, scrap and change or try in terms of the pages that I use, and then at the bottom we have a space for any more ideas. On the right hand page, I have a bunch of boxes drawn out to represent the spreads in that new journal. I find this to be super helpful for when it comes to planning out what pages are going in what order, so figuring out the sequencing of the spreads I want to use. I'm oddly quite excited to use this more structured version of the My Next Journal spread, even though planning my next journal is a fair way away. After this, I decided to get into my teaching related spreads, which, looking back on it, I probably would have liked to put in one more collection before starting these, but as you can see, I've already gone in and affixed our tip in, which we had in the setup of my current bullet journal, so the one I've been using for January through to April. This time, rather than leaving the space underneath that tip in blank, I've decided to utilize that space for a term timeline, a marking list, and a place to write out my special assessment conditions for any of my students that have them. I found that in my last journal I didn't actually utilize the space under the tip-in because it didn't have a designated purpose, so I wanted to remedy that this time around. On the other side of the spread, we have one of the teaching related pages that I find to be the most useful, and this is my term overview. Effectively what we have is a column for each of the days of the week, and a row for each of the weeks of the term, and then I can just write in any of the events that are coming up. Typically what I like to do is color code these based on what classes they're actually relevant for. So normally one generic color for anything that applies to all of my classes, and then using the specific colors that I outlined in my key if I have things that are only relevant for a particular class. Flipping over, and we're onto the layout that made me completely cut out a page in my journal, which is something I haven't done in quite a while. Normally I find the mistakes that I make in my journal to be pretty fixable, and I do have a separate video on how you can fix journal mistakes, but this time around the stuff up was pretty major. When drawing out the grid that I'm drawing out here, on the stuff up page, when I was drawing out this grid, I managed to completely throw off the spacing. I haven't included the stuff up in this video just because it happened off camera, but somehow I managed to draw the columns in only 5 spaces across rather than 6, and it kind of just threw off the whole thing, so I just cut the page out and decided that I can still use the blank side for something else. What this page is actually for though is my weekly lesson schedule. So I have 5 individual pages filled with these grids, so 2 grids per page, for a total of 10 weeks. On the other side of the spread, as you can see, this is just a before term 3 checklist, but flipping over and we are on to my monthly planning pages. This is the collection that I really wish I would have put in before my teaching related spreads, but effectively what these ones are for planning my monthly setups. So thinking about what spreads I want to include, what aesthetic or design elements I'm going for, the color palette, and of course, my monthly theme. I find these pages really helpful to fill in before I actually put pen to paper for my monthly setups, just as a way to organize my thoughts about what I want in terms of design and pages. The setup of these is a little different to normal in that I've run the boxes for my colour palettes down the page rather than across, but it still includes all of the same sections. I should probably start thinking about populating this for May. I really enjoy doing new journal setups, and I appreciate that with the way I'm approaching my bullet journaling this year and being a little bit more relaxed about the number of pages that I use in any month, it means that I'm getting to set up new journals a little bit more often. So rather than lasting me 6 months, my current journal only lasted me 4. I'm not too sure how long this B5 is going to last me. It is a fair bit bigger, so a lot more room to write stuff down. But I am certainly excited to give it a go and see if it's for me. Now I just need to do a monthly setup in it to see how this is really going to work. If you enjoyed the ideas we had in this video, in terms of page ideas for a new bullet journal setup, be sure to check out the playlist of my previous journal setups. That one is linked here on the screen and has a bunch more inspiration that might be helpful. As always team, thank you for watching, and until next time, bye!